Hello again, and welcome to yet another episode. In this one, I'm covering the button tag, and the button tag is actually really cool. The button tag is useful because it does nothing but create a clickable button. Now, it's kind of weird in that you don't do much with it, because HTML itself doesn't respond to the button tag basically at all. What you can do is, if you understand like your client-side languages, like your JavaScript or your VB script or whatever you're using, you should be using JavaScript because nobody likes VB script. When you take JavaScript, which I'll have videos about sometime in the future, but it's probably going to be some time before I get around to that. Think of it, if you don't understand what JavaScript is, think of it like this. JavaScript is a language that runs on the client's machine, in that it actually uses, your browser is running the code. And what it does is it looks at the code that's given to it through the website, and then it runs that code, and then stuff happens. It's a real simple language, and it's really easy to use once you get into it, but you can do interesting things. The button tag is really useful because you can create buttons that, when clicked, execute some JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you one of those real quick, and I'm actually going to do a real quick bit of JavaScript on it. So what I'm going to do here is take our button tag. Now, the button tag takes a couple of things. You have the type attribute. You also have the autofocus, disabled, form action, form and code type, let's see, what's the other one, form method, form no validate, form target, and your name type and value. Basically, it's used a lot for forms themselves. So you can stick a button in a form and make it do things like reset, all those kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go over, I'm going to grab a chart of the attributes, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of each of the attributes just to give you an idea of how you can really pimp out a button. But before I do all that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish doing a JavaScript, and then I'll make another button that looks like it's going to be like a really pimped out form button. So on that note, let's go ahead and on mouse down, I'm going to do alert button, button clicked, yay, and then click here to be alerted. So what this is it's just a standard button tag with the click here to be alerted as its title. The on mouse down is a event attribute, and that's basically, it runs JavaScript when you press down on the mouse button. It's as simple as that. I'll cover those in a later date when I do the full HTML5 event attributes video, and then I'll do a full HTML5 global attributes video at some point in the future. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Now you can see we have a button, and it says click here to be alerted. I click on it, and I get this little JavaScript pop-up that says button clicked, and then we click the OK button, and that's all it does. Wonderful. Now, what else can the button do? Well, the button tag takes a lot of attributes. So I've actually got it up over here on my other monitor so I don't forget any. Autofocus takes one value, and that's autofocus. So it's autofocus equals autofocus, very similar to the audio tags controls. What autofocus does is when your browser loads up the page, it should specify that this button should be the default action. So if you were to load up the page, click enter, as soon as the page loaded, it would activate this button. That's all autofocus does. Then there's the disabled, and that, as it sounds, simply disables the button. It makes it unclickable. So let's go ahead and show you that. Since I have no text in here, it just comes up as a square. Hey, I can't click it. What's going on? It's because we disabled it. So if I remove disable and say this, just to make it a little larger, this is a button. And if we load up our page, you can see we can click on it again. Yay! So let's go ahead and add our disabled again. And then the next one we have is form. This one is kind of interesting because you give it the name of the form that you are kind of linking this button to. So that's neat in that buttons don't have to be where the form is. You can have your form tag and all your form elements in it. And this button could be at the top of your page or at the bottom of your page, in a completely different location, and still act on that form. And so basically it just takes the form name. So whatever you have in your form tag as the name attribute, you can do here. So I'll just do form name. And then there's a few other major ones. There's a form. This is the form action. This one tells where you want the form to post. So if you had like a PHP script in this same thing, it would be something like form post.php. And then let's see, the other one it has is the form encode type. And it gives you these three ones. There's plain text, which is basically it takes all your attributes, creates a little comma delimited list, and posts the text, and you're done. That's usually what you'll do in most cases. Multi-part form data is used if there's an upload or a download section of that form. So let's say if it's a user profile and you have an avatar that you want them to upload, you would need to make sure that your button is posting to that form with a multi-part data form. And then there's application xwww form URL encoded, and that is simply the same thing as plain text, but only it is encoded in that it creates I can't remember whether it's an actual encode or whether it's a hash, but either way, it creates an encoded version of what's being posted for a little bit secure type posts. But it's a little complicated. I'll cover that at some point in the future. Then there's form method, and then this is in case you don't understand how the HTTP protocol, which the World Wide Web uses, it uses 4 different types of values: delete, get, post, and put. And most sites don't even care what's being posted. It'll just post the values and they act on the values. Whether it's post or delete, doesn't matter. But other more modern web technologies like Ruby on Rails will actually use delete to actually delete a record, whereas get will get the information, post could update it, and put will create a new one. So it actually makes sense. These are the 4 main actions of your create, update, record, delete, or read, delete, which is your CRUD. And then the next thing we have, so we're just going to put this as post because post is usually what you'll use. Get methods, if I had, instead of using post, I use get, you'll actually see the attributes in the URL bar, which sometimes is you want because you want to save those values for the user later. Sometimes you don't because you want to hide like IDs and stuff. And then the next thing we have is form no validate. Form no validate basically it indicates that the form itself should not be validated when submitted. So this overrides the form's default no validate tag. So it's a little interesting. It's not really it's not too useful because no one really uses the HTML's built-in validations or things like that. But it's probably good to set this to true or false either way, whether you want it to validate or not. And since this is no validate, true would be you don't validate, and false would be we still validate. That's if the form tag by default has the no validate tag set to the opposite, which may be a little confusing, but once we cover the form tag, it'll make a little bit more sense. And the next thing is the form target, which is the same thing as you have in your anchor tag, which tells it where you want the link to go to. In this case, it's telling you when you submit that form, do you want it to change the current page to wherever it's submitting? Do you want it to create a new page saying, oh, thank you for posting your form? Do you want it to work on the self or the top element? It all works that way. So it's the exact same thing as target, but only it's for the form itself, hence the name form target. Makes it really easy. The next thing we need to do is give it a name. This is what value is posted when you click on the button, or for the name of it. So the way it works, when you post values on a form, you have key and value, which is your basically think of it as the name and then what it does. And so this one we would say like form button. And then the next one is type. Now this is really important. The type can be 3 things for a button. The first one it can be is just button. That means it doesn't do anything. It'll just work. It'll just click and it waits for something else to happen. That's useful if you're doing something like JavaScript. The next one you have is reset. And the reset, you know those forms where you have the reset button and it makes all the values blank? That's what does this. This reset will automatically take whatever form is targeted and then zero out all the values. It basically makes them all blank. And that's very useful if you have a small form that, you know, has like personal information. You're like, oh wait, I typed 3 different things wrong. Just click the reset button and you can refill it. The last one is the submit type. And this submit basically takes this button and targets the form and then says, okay, we're done, send the information off. And then the form itself will take the values and post it to another URL where you can act on that and do things like contact forms or guest books, etc. So submit does that. It submits the form, reset clears the form, and then button does nothing. And then the next thing we have one more, and that's value. Now, value is a little strange to have on the button because you're like, well, what would I need for a button for? I've found it very useful if you have multiple buttons. Let's say you have a name and an email, and you want them to subscribe to 1, 2, or 3 different newsletters. And what you do is you can create a button for each newsletter, and you can say, well, you know, this button is subscribe to the happy newsletters. The next one would be subscribe to the sad newsletter. And then the last one would be subscribe to the mad newsletter. And what you can do is you can actually put in the value like mad or sad or happy. Once you have that in your value, then your name could be something a little more specific, like form subscription. And then you still make it type, and what it will do is it will post that form, but it'll also post the value of happy with a name of form subscription. So you could go in your code, in your how you react on it, and you can say form _ subscription, or you can say like if form subscription equals happy, subscribe to happy. If it equals mad, subscribe to mad. And of course, I'll get into forms a little more. Buttons, this later half of this button video has been kind of advanced because you need to know what forms are, you need to know how to post them. So if you don't understand forms yet, just wait for the form tag where I will explain all of this in detail. It'll probably be a long video. But basically, if you don't understand it, just remember that button creates a physically clickable button that you can act upon in some way or another. One of the more popular ways to use them nowadays is with JavaScript because of the fact that they don't require a form and they aren't linked to anything. So go ahead and try out a button, make a button, create an alert, and see what you think about it. Hope you learned something. Peace.